Do you think this government is succeeding or failing at protecting its Jewish population? I believe Spain condemned Israel for the treatment of some of these activists, but their own police, that was also caught on video. The Spanish police was actually beating the people on camera. To your knowledge, has Canada summoned the Spanish ambassador to talk about that? And what do you think would happen if Israel had just laid down its arms? Do you think Hamas would just leave Israel alone, or do you think that they would do something even more destructive?
Should I answer?
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest problems that is ravaging Canadian communities right now is anti-Semitism. Synagogues are being threatened, shot at, and Jews are wondering what country they're actually living in, because this is not the Canada they remember. This is not the Canada they immigrated to. Joining us today to talk about this very important subject, Canada's response, and what is going on in the international community regarding Jews and anti-Semitism, is the Ambassador of Israel, Ido Moed. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on Northern Perspective.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
So before we get into any of the heavy topics, I just want to ask you, Canadians may not know, a lot about your background. What journey did you follow to actually become an ambassador, and specifically ambassador to Canada?
I was born in Holland and grew up partially in Holland, partially in Israel. And I remember at a younger age in Dutch high school, someone asked me about Israel, something about how do you go to school? Do you ride a camel? And, in Holland, everybody rides a bike. So it's a sort of just an informative question. And with time, I discovered two things. There's a lot of interest in Israel from everywhere, and I have this knack to share with people what Israel is about. So marrying these two things together came after university. There was a program that we have at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of recruiting what we call cadets. That's the training program to become a diplomat. And it just so happened that when I finished my university degree, that was available. So that's when I joined. And I've been to the Netherlands because I speak Dutch, Singapore, China, Dominican Republic is actually my first posting, and Canada. So in our system, you can ask, you cannot choose, but you can ask where would you like to go, and if you're selected, then you go there. So Canada was very much on my list because of a lot of reasons. It's the third largest Jewish diaspora in the world, very friendly country, strong relations, very much focused on technology, which interests me very, very much. And so I thought that's a very fertile ground to do more groundbreaking work in bilateral relations. So that's how I ended up in Canada.
Well, that's interesting. It's almost similar to a lot of the journeys that refugees and immigrants come into Canada. Canada seems to be high on their list because of our international reputation. And on that, what has been your experience in talking to Canadians since you've arrived here on their perception of Israel? What do they understand well, and maybe what do they misunderstand about Israel?
So I found out a few things. One is Israel is known to many people, whether it's through religion or through business or through tourism, whatever, personal experiences. People know that we are there, which is a lot because, this great world, very big world. What people don't really understand is the size of Israel, how small it is, and how do you compare, how do you explain that when you hear about Israel so often and you hear it's a powerful technology country, when you hear about our military and so on. So there is this sort of a gap that people don't understand. How come the country is so small, surrounded by enemies, and has become so successful in what it does? So in that area, that's where I find myself talking most about Where do we come from when we have this kind of technological powerhouse we've created? And what is with this security situation that we are facing? What is it? What's happening there? And then there is a lot of bias, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But that's the area that I think I cover most when I'm talking to people who don't know much about Israel.
And no doubt, the conversation tends to move towards October 7th, which is a day that we know will live in infamy. Um, in terms of relations between Canada and Israel since October 7th, has anything changed, do you think? And if so, how has it so?
It has changed very, very significantly. On October the 7th, we found the hearts and minds of most Canadians very much welcoming, embracing Israel, from the Prime Minister, from the Governor General, actually, all the way down to people on the street. And that outpouring of solidarity and sympathy changed quite fast over time. And there are several reasons for that, but what I expected was already we were anticipating this kind of a shift because we see how the coverage of what's happening in the Middle East very quickly influences the public perspective of Israel. So even before Israel has started to react on Gaza, trying to retrieve the hostages and mitigate Hamas attacks, there were already demonstrations and hate marches on the streets in the major cities in Canada. And you could see that there are organizations such as Samedun and others who were leading those marches and those hate manifestations. That was a source for concern by itself. But then you see that it also, in the same line, the let's say the official line has gradually changed. So we started to hear more and more condemnations. A very memorable one was when a hospital in Gaza was shelled, and there was an immediate, automatic, knee-jerk condemnation of Israel by the then Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that message, by the way, is still on internet, even though Canadians themselves, the government has found out that the Islamic Jihad was responsible for a misfiring of a rocket from Gaza into Israel. So these are the things that gradually erode the let's say the sympathy and the wave of support that was there immediately after October the 7th. That was a reflection of that. But beyond that, I think the fact that Canadian government also decided to take steps regarding the bilateral relations, which also meant that we saw that there is less support and less cooperation from this government towards Israel in a situation of fighting an existential war.
So on that shift, does Israel still regard Canada as a reliable friend and ally?
We do have very strong foundation of the relations. Almost 80 years of official bilateral relations. And when we speak at the highest level, we had a conversation between President Herzog and Prime Minister Carney just the other day. We reiterate that. What we miss is a public announcement of these strong relations. So I believe that the relations are there, but I think that the optics of the relations is not good.
And on the war that has been going on in the Middle East, everyone seemed to understand, as you mentioned, immediately after October 7th, that Israel had a right to defend itself. It was attacked unprovoked. But there's been a lot of condemnation. There's been a lot of media coverage of casualties in the Gaza region. What is Israel's stance on that? Because one of the talking points is, well, there's too many civilians that are being caught in the crossfire, and Israel shouldn't do that. And the natural response is, okay, well, what would you have Israel do? So, just so everyone can understand, what has been Israel's approach in order to try to prevent civilian casualties in Gaza?
So let's go back to 2005 first. Israel vacated the Gaza Strip completely because one of the misconceptions is that it was conquered or it was occupied land. So Israel was out of Gaza. And Gaza has a border with Israel and has a border with Egypt. Another misconception that Israel is surrounding Gaza from all sides. So what we did before October the 7th was, and after we left, there were elections held, and Hamas won those elections. And Hamas actually, of course, instilled their reign of terror over Gaza, and used all the money that actually Israel and Canada and many other countries helped garner towards the population there. They used that to build an underground monster of a city, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers off, and it's a very small piece of land, but tunnels that were filled with ammunition, with shells, with bombs, training their younger generation in the tens of thousands out of the 2 million to fight Israel. And so while we were believing that our collaboration projects that create employment on the border between Gaza and Israel would benefit the Gaza economy, and we even thought that perhaps Qatari money would help alleviate some of the problems, that money was actually used by Hamas to further increase their construction of this mechanism, of this war machine that they unleashed on Israel on October the 7th. So when we see that, this is the threat that Israel is facing. So it's not just several militants, as it's called. This is a military terror organization of a magnitude of a military organization that we were fighting, that crossed the border by the thousands into Israel, took hostage 251 Israelis, and continued to shell and fire into Israel also afterwards. So when you want to get your hostages back and you want to eliminate the threat that emanates from Hamas, you have to go into that territory. You cannot just call them and tell them, guys, stop, because they won't. They said very clearly, we'll do it again and again and again. What we did then was to try and to move the population away from the centers of gravity of Hamas. But their tunnel network was, and now is almost completely destroyed, was underneath the whole Gaza Strip. And the piers where it came out from were children's rooms, hospitals, kindergarten, mosques. They did that deliberately because they knew, of course, that this is where we would attack. And they wanted to show the world that we are attacking kindergartens, schools, mosques, hospitals, and the like. So we first removed the population. This is why the very vast majority of the population, of course, survived the war without houses, without infrastructure, because that's what Hamas abused. They hid behind that to attack Israel. So what we were trying to do, and we still continue to do, is to make sure that the threat of Hamas does not reach Israel anymore. And in order to do that, Gaza actually needs to be rebuilt in a way that's in line with a peaceful approach of people that want to live side by side with Israel. Up until now, we don't have that. So we are waiting for the second stage of agreement with the Palestinians, with Hamas. But Hamas, of course, does not want to lay down their weapons and their arms. And unless that happens, we cannot move any step further. We are doing whatever we can to allow for humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. We tried several mechanisms to alleviate that. But we have a huge bottleneck called UNRWA. UNRWA is an organization that was set up in the whole world. There's only one organization that was set up by the United Nations for one group of people. UNHCR, that's the United Nations Organization for Refugees around the world, deals with all refugee groups around the world. But for Palestinians, there's a separate organization, and one has to ask why. And the answer is that it is filled by Palestinians, infiltrated by Hamas, and actually abused to eternalize, from the word eternity, the refugee problem, because their aim is to go back into Israel and to destroy the state of Israel. So it's not trying to find a solution for the refugees unless it is at the cost of the existence of the state of Israel. So UNRWA has a purpose to destroy the state of Israel. That's their purpose. That's why Palestinians live in refugee camps in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, because those countries allowed this situation to perpetuate. They allowed those people to live, or they forced them actually to live as refugees and did not allow them to integrate into society, which is what has happened all throughout the world. This is how the Korean refugee problem was solved when UNRWA was set up. It's a similar organization for Korea in the 50s. But this specific organization is a huge problem. And this is why we decided that it will not operate anymore on Israel. It has abused the international system to actually promote that agenda of destruction of the state. And so while we are trying to alleviate the humanitarian issues, challenges that the Palestinians face, others are trying to actually destroy the state of Israel. So what we are doing is allowing for aid to flow in through other organizations. We collaborate with every NGO and other organization that recognizes the fact that Israel is there to stay and does not work against the interests of Israel. And we'll continue to do that. We know that they are there. We know that we have to acknowledge the fact that they also, of course, deserve a life. We tried to help them to get there, even though Hamas was controlling them with all kinds of projects that we did. Actually, the people who were murdered and butchered on October the 7th, living in kibbutzim next to Gaza, were the peace activists that pulled Israeli and pressured Israeli government to do more and more for Palestinians. There were those who were going to the border to drive families to have special medical treatment that they couldn't get in Gaza. They were the ones who were providing more and more aid to the Palestinians. And they befriended many Palestinians who abused that friendship to know more about their kibbutzim, about their communities, and used that to attack them and kill them on October the 7th. So that was also an eye-opener for many Israelis, that this kind of very benevolent and foreign progressive look towards the Palestinians was actually abused to murder these people in the most horrific way.
And, there's a lot of narratives going on about a genocide is happening in Gaza. I'm sure you've heard that. But there's an interesting kind of test that I've heard talked about online, and I want to ask it to you. So if, let's say 1 month after October 7th, Hamas laid down their arms, surrendered their guns, what would Israel have done at that point? Would it have continued with a full-scale military assault on Gaza, or would the response be different if Hamas had completely surrendered?
We had 3 goals for the war: to release the hostages, Hamas lay down the weapons, and Gaza and the Gaza government not pose a security threat to Israel in the future. So laying down the weapons would be a prerequisite for anything else. But of course, the hostages and the future of Gaza would also have to be resolved. And there was, and it's a non-starter. Hamas is an organization, a fundamentalist Muslim extremist organization, liaised with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, by the way, also present here in Canada. We've seen them here in Toronto, what their kind of conference that they held here, talking about Jew-free society and all of that. So Hamas will never lay down the weapon. So it's not even an issue to consider or contemplate. It just doesn't exist in their vocabulary.
And what do you think would happen if Israel had just laid down its arms? Do you think Hamas would just leave Israel alone, or do you think that they would do something even more destructive?
Should I answer? I think that our viewers understand that Hamas, the covenant says Israel has no right to exist, and they should do everything in their power to destroy the state of Israel.
And this is public knowledge.
Yes. So people here who are shouting in support of Hamas, girls who shout that rape is a form of resistance, from the river to the sea, free Palestine, all of these are calls that Hamas, from the river to the sea, is part of the first paragraph of the covenant of Hamas. And people don't know that. By the way, they don't know which river and which sea they're talking about, and they don't know a lot of many other things. And I think that what young people don't realize, and this is one of the biggest challenges that we face, that it's not about liberation, colonialism, or something, some kind of an oppression. There is a group of people that is set to destroy the state of Israel, to kill Jews. This is what they are talking about. And this is why we see this also elsewhere. So this is not just anti-Israel or anti-Zionist. It's the same. It's against the Jews, and we see it again and again and again, as we saw last night also in Montreal, and we see it again and again. Shots being fired, people are being attacked. Just daily so-called routine of anti-Semitism. According to Bnei Brit, there are almost 20 incidents of anti-Semitism daily, which means almost one every hour. It's 1% of a population that suffers 70% of hate crimes in the country. So something is driving this, and it's not just the images. There is something here that is spreading around and is very dangerous. And it has to do with the fact that there are people out there who want to destroy the state of Israel and want to destroy, actually, in many ways, the values and the very rights that we have in the West, throughout the West. It's not just the Jews. It's about people who feel entitled to whatever the West has and say the West as it is has no right to exist, but they start with Israel. And so they look at the reactions of the broad society, of the government, to attacks against the Jews, and they learn from that. And they say, okay, we'll finish with the Jews, we'll continue with the rest. And you see that sometimes churches are attacked. You see that the square in front of the Basilica in Montreal is being occupied again and again by anti-Israel activists there. So this is something, this is food for thought for all of us. We are talking about the values that are really the basics of our society, of tolerance and of respect. And these are actually under attack. It's not just the Jews.
Now, one of the interesting thoughts about what's been going on in Canada is a lot of Canadians will take their lead from how their government responds and how their government acts. And a lot of people that have come over from other countries and different parts of the world, sometimes they will take advantage of the government's position. One of the things that the government did, which surprised me, and I'm interested if it surprised you, is when first they said to essentially Hamas that we will recognize the state of Palestine if they accommodate specific conditions. So that was a surprise. And then what was even more surprising was that after Hamas didn't accommodate any of those conditions, they officially recognized Palestine as a state. What was your response to that and your reaction?
Canada held for a long period of time a position that it will not recognize Palestinian statehood unless Israel and the Palestinians reach some kind of a settlement. And this changed after October the 7th. And we told the Canadian government, recognizing a Palestinian state now is a direct reward to Hamas. That's it. And this is how Hamas also recognized this step. They said, these are the fruits of our attack on October the 7th. So, of course, we were very critical of that, and we still are. And I think that the so-called reforms on the Palestinian side are not taking place in any way, shape, or form. Mahmoud Abbas is still their prime minister, elected decades ago. The most venomous government program I've ever heard still exists, which is pay for slay. So every terrorist who killed Israelis is getting a stipendium on a monthly basis. And this needs to stop, because this breeds not only just the hate, but breeds violence, direct violence against Israelis. So Palestinians are not ready, the majority of them, unfortunately, are not ready to recognize the state of Israel. I think the reforms is another way of saying you have to understand that if you want to live in peace in this part of the world, you have to live side by side with Israel. Now, we hear that all the time, and we hear Prime Minister reiterating this again and again and again. Israel will live side by side, two-state solution. So I haven't heard anybody on the Palestinian side saying this. I haven't heard a soul say, well, I have heard a soul. I have spoken to Palestinians who do want to live side by side in peace with Israel, but they are not in government, and they can't raise their voices because they're afraid of Hamas and others. Hamas has control over a vast majority of the Palestinian society. I think this is one of the reasons why elections are not taking place. The local elections that happen now in Gaza showed that there is momentum for new movements within Palestinian society. So let's wait and see how this further develops. But the current Palestinian Authority is vehemently against recognizing the existence of the State of Israel, even if they acknowledge it, because we live together. We've had the Oslo agreements and so on, but we don't see them preparing their population to live side by side with Israel. I don't see a clear and strong recognition of the fact that October the 7th massacre should have never taken place. It's reprehensible. This has nothing to do with Palestinian or Muslim values. No, they don't say all of that. They don't. So unless that happens, we are not ready also on the Israeli side to trust an entity that actually pays people a reward for having killed Israelis.
Right. And just on the civilian casualty side again, one of the arguments that is made is Israel should be taking more care to try to avoid civilian casualties. But when you look at other wars and other examples of this, World War II, for example, massive civilian casualties caused by Britain, caused by the United States. Do you find that there's some hypocrisy in some of these voices that are even in the West criticizing Israel for civilian casualties when far more were actually inflicted in these other wars?
Absolutely. It's a standard that has been laid on Israel, which is well, in our mind, we are ready for it because we have legal advisors to every combat unit, and every combat action is actually being scrutinized before we do it. So we know when we enter a theater of fight somewhere exactly what are the boundaries. We know in advance how many civilians are there. We know what we can do to get them out of harm's way. We send them messages. We send them little bombs that don't inflict any damage to let them know that they are in a danger zone. We send them pamphlets. We let people know that they have to move. We send them maps where to go. So we prefer them alive but out of their homes than other ways. And so what the West would have liked Israel to do is to use, perhaps a postman to call on the door to tell every Hamas, can you please go to be arrested in Israel, or at least stop fighting. It doesn't happen, of course. It's not realistic. And the ratio between innocent bystanders and terrorists that were killed during this war is, of course, beyond anything else that has happened in the past. It's very, very low. So I think we have done our utmost to make sure, in every loss, by the way, in every death is a tragedy. And it's a strategy for the Palestinians, for the Hamas. That's actually their strategy, hiding behind the population so that innocent bystanders will get killed. So getting them into harm's way. I think we have done what no other country in the world has done before, and that is to make sure that people stay out of harm's way as much as possible. We know that these people will remain there. They will remain our neighbors. And we want them to survive this horrendous reign of terror that they've been suffering, Hamas, which is when it came to attack us the way it did on October the 7th.
Well, and that's the crux of this, right? Is because Israel understands that the vast majority of people in the region, they're hoping, are not a threat to Israel. They're just being subjugated and used as a international prop to try to turn the world against Israel, as it were. And I think, as you've laid it out, and this is what I think a lot of people are starting to see, that's been Hamas' strategy for decades, because why would they have built this underground terror network leading directly into hospitals and churches and children's centers if they were not intent on using their own citizens as a shield? And people will say, well, why did the citizens let them do that? Well, that's, I think, a bit of a naive question, because Hamas is the body and power that has all the guns. And if you disagree with Hamas, and it's the same consequence of these people that want to speak up, but they're too scared to do so. And this leads to a lot of international publication and trying to sway the public opinion and government's opinion. But then you have these governments, and I think Canada is one of them, where in one breath we will say we support Israel and we stand by Israel. But in another breath, we'll do something that is very, I think, obviously not in support of Israel and can be construed as in support of Hamas. And then we have these situations where, activists are trying to get into Israel to help. I'm not sure what their aim is, but a recent situation was there was a boat bound for the Gaza Strip, and Israel intercepted that boat, and our government accused Israel of mistreating the people on that boat, to which you received a summons from Minister Anand. Were those people mistreated, and what is Israel's official response to that?
So let's go first back to Hamas and to Palestinians. So the international community condemns the victims and anything that has been done to Palestinians. But when Hamas came back into Gaza and they suspected people of theft, of collaboration with Israel or whatever, they were executed in the middle of the town square in plain day sight for everybody, and they actually invited people to see that. So if people care about the lives of Palestinians, I just wonder, because I couldn't hear their voice on that day, and not on any of those days. And I just wonder, what is this about? Is this against Israel, or is it about pro-Palestinians? So I stopped calling these organizations pro-Palestinians because I don't think that they really care about Palestinians. They just want the attack to go, they want everything to go against Israel. And so when we come to this flotilla, there were about 400 vessels going from Turkey in the direction of Gaza to what they thought was to break a blockade, illegal blockade of Gaza. Now, the blockade is very legal because we are at war with Gaza. Hamas is there. They used in the past the sea vessels to get munitions, to get arms, and to continue the fight. So according to the United Nations, by the way, they acknowledge in a letter that this is a legal blockade. So we have to settle, this has to be very clear to everybody. The blockade was very legal. Then we talk about what was the aim of this flotilla. They said, we want to make sure that these people receive humanitarian aid. All of these vessels were empty of humanitarian aid. There was not an ounce on any of them of any kind of humanitarian aid that was destined for Gaza. However, we still offered anything that this flotilla wanted to get shipped to Gaza to be offloaded in an Israeli port, and we will transfer this to Gaza. We offered this many times, that these flotillas happened in the past. When they still went on their way and deliberately tried to reach the area of the blockade of where this block C route is, the Israeli Navy stopped them and arrested them. When they resisted arrest, we used the same means as the Spanish police used on the same people when they arrived in the Spanish airport and started creating mayhem there. So non-lethal tools to make sure to subdue them and to have them obey the authorities as they were asked to do. So they were taken to Israel and they were released within 48 hours, just got them out of Israel. And we've heard later stories, grand stories, including Canadians, who were telling, they didn't know that they were recorded, but they were walking, some girl was walking at the airport in Pearson Airport in Toronto here, and she was saying, oh, I have to remember, I have a fractured tailbone and a twisted ankle. Now you can see that she's fine. So it's all fabrications, and we know these very same people also published blood libels against Israel in the past. They have all the interest in the world to fabricate whatever accusations they want to fabricate. They had a press conference, I think, some days ago on the Hill. No evidence whatsoever was presented there besides a little scar on somebody's hand, which may have happened. And so I don't think that any record exists. I haven't seen any show of it. And when I was summoned to the Canadian government to talk about that, I read to them the reaction of the Israeli prison service, exactly how they were handled. in accordance with international law, with all respect and everything. And so this is where it ends, and the information is out there on our side. And if there are any cases, we're still waiting, and we'll investigate any and each of those cases, of those claims.
Now, the Spanish situation is interesting because I believe Spain condemned Israel for the treatment of some of these activists, but their own police, that was also caught on video, and if memory serves, the Spanish police was actually beating the people on camera. Versus, I don't believe there was anything to that extreme on camera for Israel when they were detaining these people. So, to your knowledge, has Canada summoned the Spanish ambassador to talk about that?
Not to my knowledge, no. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Look, we face this situation of double standards way too often, and I think that the idea of communicating through such messages like abominable treatment before you get the facts and so on doesn't help them, the people who are involved, doesn't help the relations, and doesn't help public opinion. And I think that we have to look at the situation as one that is much more complex than it is. Instead of pointing fingers, trying to understand what Israel is facing, an existential war of a magnitude, of a longitude that we've never seen before. We are doing our utmost to prevent any harm to people who are not involved. But at the same time, we also have to remember that the Israeli population has undergone a huge trauma. And I wouldn't ask the world to have mercy with us, because we don't need that. We are strong and very resilient, and we are getting through this. But I do expect people to understand that this was a deliberate attempt to eradicate and to erase the state of Israel off the map, orchestrated by Iran through its proxies and directly, and again, at a magnitude that never happened in the past. Iran is still a threat, not just to Israel, but to global economy and to regional security. And we have to acknowledge that as well. And so this is the situation that we are faced with. And beyond that, we have to realize that here at home, there is also a threat to our values, to our core values as a society, as we see it from Israel. And this is why we raise these issues also with the Canadian government, be it on anti-Semitism and be it broadly about the threat of extremist fundamentalism that is entering the country.
And you mentioned double standards. Canadians are starting to see the same thing here at home as well. Canadians who probably knew nothing of Israel prior to October 7th, nothing about Israel prior to all of these protests that are starting but they've been continuing around the country on university campuses, in cities of as you say, the pro-Palestinian crowd, and they're chanting death threats. They're chanting, death to Israel, and even death to Canada in some cases. Some cases where you can hear these people only about 6 feet away from police officers say that they're going to kill the police officers if they touch them. So Canadians have seen this double standard even in our own society, because on February 22nd of 2022, we had the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, and the vast majority of those people were peaceful. They were, an inconvenience to be sure, but they weren't saying anything violent or demanding anything violent. Yet there were arrests there, and the Emergencies Act was called in. Yet we have an almost non-response from police organizations across the country when it comes to the Palestinian protests. And this is where I think these types of groups are emboldened, and why these attacks have increased across Canada. And then we have Mark Carney coming out a few days ago on a press conference that seemed to be aimed at addressing anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, we've had the same conversations with Justin Trudeau and Anthony Housefather and the Jewish caucus. There's been strong condemnation to Carney's press conference in that it doesn't really do anything. What was your response? What's Israel's response to what his plan is in order to address anti-Semitism in Canada?
So our plan is to be as proactive as possible, to work together with security establishment in Canada to inform them, to inspire them, to let them know how we see things, what do we know, where do we see threats, how do we go about mitigating this kind of hatred, which is unprecedented. And I think that it's important to share our best practices and knowledge and so on. So we do that. We share education programs that we have developed over the years that we know that also work in other countries. We encourage debates and closed-door sessions with government and grassroots organizations with experts to talk about anti-Semitism online. We do that on a continual basis because I think that that's an opportunity for people to think out of the box, to voice ideas. This phenomenon is horrendous. It's destructive and it's growing. So we have to be very proactive. So it's on a security side, it's an education side. We are, as embassy, I'm very, very active in expressing my solidarity, not just with the Jewish community, but with other communities that support Israel, that support the Jewish people, that want to stand strong together. And this is also extremely important because this is a time where people really look for that kind of solidarity. We look to our neighbors. We don't always know that the neighbor is hurting, or we see that he's hurting, but we don't understand what we can do. So just as an example, little story, friends of ours in Ottawa, who are not Jewish, they know that Jews often have a mezuzah, a little ornament, Jewish ornament outside the door to mark that there are Jews living there. This is a part of a blessing for the house. And sometimes this was torn down by anti-Semites. So those friends in Ottawa decided to hang a huge mezuzah. Usually it's a very small. They hang a huge mezuzah outside with a menorah next to it. And they say, I want to see who wants to take these things down. So sometimes this kind of very strong vocal solidarity is making a huge difference. I won't comment on the speech beyond to say that I think you can't take Israel out of the picture. Israel, the bond between Canadians and Israel is very strong. Canadian Jews, again, it's the third largest diaspora in the world, are part and parcel of the relations between Israel and Canada. They've always been very active and very Zionist in their approach. So it's an extremely important component of what we see today. We see a rise, a very significant rise in anti-Semitism after October the 7th, which means that there is a very strong relationship between those two. And the fact that many of those efforts of these anti-Semitic attacks is to delegitimize, dehumanize Israel and to attack the very fact that it has no right to exist, that is something that needs to be addressed here also by the Canadian government because it's part of the issue.
So what we're hearing from a lot of our Jewish friends and people in the Jewish community is that they, after living here for decades, some of them born and raised here, they are now considering leaving Canada because they don't feel safe. And given the climate that has been occurring and developing in Canada of anti-Semitism, do you think this government is succeeding or failing at protecting its Jewish population?
Well, the measure is the people. And I hear a lot of people talk about Plan B. So Plan B is leaving Canada, having part of their assets move elsewhere. And that's very concerning because in my mind, you can't run away from problems. You have to face them. You have to deal with them. And so I'm more worried about that, the fact that they think that by moving away, things will change. And I just think that it's never the case. We have to try and find solutions here. This is why we're trying to support the government as much as we can. And I hope that they adopt and use as much of it as they can to increase the feeling of security among the Jewish population. We hear them say time and again, we feel abandoned, and in spite of what the government is doing. So I think that this is what we would expect the end result to be, to people feel safe instead of abandoned.
And if you could deliver a message to Canadians that are not Jewish, so they can better understand how to help their neighbors and their friends that are Jewish in this uncertain time, what would your message be?
We have a saying in Jewish tradition, which is to many the core of Jewish essence, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. That's it. Find your own interpretation to that. Knock on the door, say hi, ask how you're doing, talk about things, do something in the neighborhood, or just, wave at somebody when you haven't talked to him for a long time. Just acknowledge that you know that he is there. But show the love and show the support, be there for them, and try to find ways to fight together against this flood of hate that is coming our way. It's destructive. Whatever direction it goes, it's destructive. So this is what we have to stand strong against. So if we want to be proactive, and if we understand that this is the time to act, this is not a time anymore to stay in our comfort zone. We have to step out of it. What shall we do? Start with our neighbors. Just say hi. Just do something together. Talk to each other. I think that will make a world of a difference. The end result will be, for example, if a Jewish kid goes to campus and somebody starts attacking him because he wears a Magen David, another non-Jewish kid will come and stand next to him, and he'll tell the assailant, if you're talking to him, you're talking to me, which all of a sudden changes the whole equation. It's simple. There are very simple, peaceful measures, but measures that will make the future of our society and will make a difference for the future of our society. We have to be able to stand up and say, here's where we draw the line. This is unacceptable to us. And it should come from a positive place, from a heart. And this is why love thy neighbor as thyself is so important in my mind.